Hello and welcome back to Soccer Supernova, a state of mind dedicated football chat show. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Gordon Duncan. You'll probably recognise his voice a little bit more than you'll recognise his face. He is the voice of Clyde One's Super Scoreboard. So Gordon, thank you so much for joining us and how are you?
I'm well. Looking at myself in this camera, it's probably best that it's the voice rather than the face that is supposedly recognised, but not happy to be here and looking forward to it.
Not at all, not at all. So before we get into your career, let's go right back to the very beginning. And when did the love of football really begin for you?
Probably like a lot of people watching or listening, just as way back as far as I can remember, really, in terms of I was born like a sort of stone's throw away from Fir Park, if you like, and I grew up in a street nearby in Motherwell where I could like see the floodlights poking up from behind the houses, and the primary school I went to was like almost joined on to Fir Park. If any of your listeners have been to particularly the away end actually at Celtic Park, you'll have seen at Fir Park, sorry, you'll have seen the school next door, and yeah, just kind of seduced by it early on. It was actually the stadium that sort of drew me in, but before anything else, like everybody, there's probably a family connection. Weirdly, my dad and stuff not overly bothered about football, kind of take or leave. But my papa on my mum's side and my mum were kind of big Motherwell fans, and yeah, and it just kind of grew arms and legs from there. And like everybody else, started playing, started getting probably dragged along to games initially. I don't remember my first game. I do remember that I fell asleep, which probably tells its own story about the standard of football I chose to watch. But yeah, just like that, and just kind of grew from there, really.
What are your early memories? Obviously, not your first game, maybe not the most exciting one, but what are the standouts from back then?
I do remember not long. It wouldn't have been my first, but it must have been there or thereabouts. So we're talking early to mid-90s. Motherwell lost on penalties in a League Cup game to Alloa, and incredibly, actually chose to go back after that. Now that I think about it, but yeah, that's the one. Always kind of hang that as being like one of the first, with knowing for sure that it wasn't the actual first. It was there or thereabouts, and character building. That was day one on the roller coaster, I think, and it's never been a dull day since.
What was it like, growing up in Glasgow at that time and not being one of the big two's fans?
Yeah, I mean the weird thing about, and probably speaking on behalf of fans of all kind of smaller teams round about Glasgow, being from Motherwell, it wasn't. We had a real mix, so I've got a few mates who are Motherwell fans, but then of course loads of Celtic and Rangers fans as well. And it never really dawns on you when you're a kid. It's more now, and particularly the job, and I'm sure we'll get onto it. It's just you're met with that, who do you really support? What's your big team? That sort of thing, which is still a little bit annoying. But it's just kind of water off a duck's back, that side of thing now. Professionally and personally, growing up, I was surrounded by a lot of my mates who were Motherwell fans, and we'd go to games together and stuff, knowing fine well that 15 minutes along the road was other big stadia, and that's the teams that won trophies and so on, and we had to just get by and never knowing what to expect on a Saturday afternoon.
A few tears and tantrums along the way.
Absolutely.
So then obviously you're getting that little bit older, and then maybe the playing career's not quite worked out. So is it just a combination really, two loves to eventually get into the sports journalism side?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, that happened very early. I'm not one of these guys that will like lean against a bar in a pub and say, "Oh, I could have made it if it wasn't for X, Y, and Z." And it was far from that. But it probably dawned on me at about 13 that playing football wasn't really an option, and talking about it might be. So it did go kind of as far back as that. I always remember kind of that realization that probably talking about it, writing about it, probably would be the first thing that I aimed for. And then the kind of broadcasting came a bit later. I was probably a bit shyer than people would expect as a kind of teenager, and then maybe latterly realised that broadcast. And you're right, yeah, a love of football and a love of talking. I don't know if that's if I should admit that, but yeah, that's probably the two loves that came together.
So what was that pathway like then to eventually get to, like you say, where you are now in the broadcasting stage?
It was like conventional, but not in the sense that Peter Martin, who many of your listeners will be familiar with the name, used to be the host of Superscoreboard and now does his own thing. He was a neighbour of mine and kind of took me and did a bit of work experience at Clyde One. So that's specifically where that side of it grew from. But even before that, I was had a family friend who like used to write the programmes and stuff like that at Fir Park. So I would go along to the games, sit in the press box, go to the press conference after. So the kind of experience thing came first, and then I did a postgrad in broadcast journalism. So then the academic side sort of get married up. But by that point, I was sort of already out doing games at the weekend for Superscoreboard, and then it just sort of grew from there, really.
What's it like when you're stoating about different grounds up and down the country? Because you're still at least getting to, get to a game, get to the ground. It's a little bit different to what you're getting to do now.
Yeah, it's funny that, like, hot off the press sort of thing, like a couple of weeks ago I would have said, yeah, I really miss it. And funnily enough, I've just started doing a couple of bits and pieces out at games for Sky. And I'm not, forgive me, I'm not entirely sure when this goes out, but this weekend I'm going up to Dingwall. And I've never been so excited for a trip to Dingwall before. You shouldn't be excited for a drive to Dingwall, because I used to love going out and about to games, like particularly the era where I was really like out and about would be the time when Rangers were in Division 3 and working up towards the top flight. So I almost, through work, managed to tick off like all 42 SPFL grounds. I think I'm only a couple away, and some new sides have come into the league since then. So maybe lacking a couple, but I used to absolutely love that. There's just no substitute for like seeing football live and experiencing it that way, and seeing different players and different teams in different places and parts of the country. I absolutely loved it. And yeah, you're right. So for the last 4 years, I've been largely studio based. I'll occasionally manage to escape on like a big, maybe a cup final or a Scotland game or something like that. And just in the last couple of weeks, I've done a couple of things for Sky that I'm looking forward to. So yeah, you're right. Getting out and about is brilliant.
What are your standout moments, your standout grounds?
Oh, I mean, that sort of shift of following Rangers at times throughout it was just ridiculous, because you were just going to places that just weren't ready for the number of press and media and so on. That would be the side I saw, and then I'm sure the number of fans as well. I always remember going to Elgin alongside Jim Duffy for Superscoreboard, and we had to we got the ticket or whatever it would be, the pass, and they had us sitting with me directly behind them rather than next to each other. Which is just so weird, because we're trying to broadcast. I was just looking at the back of his big baldy head, just there, like square at the back of his head, and we could hear each other because of the headset, but it just wasn't conducive to any sort of conversation at all. So that's one that springs to mind as a journalist, if you like, and as a fan. I went on all sorts of weird European trips and stuff with Motherwell, and that little spell they had of like making it to the qualification stages, sort of planes, trains and automobiles to all sorts of places. I think one of the first ones was Llanelli, if that's my Welsh pronunciation. Any Welsh listeners I can apologise for butchering that. Just like minibus straight down all the way to Wales. Guys were like peeing out the windows. We were like going down the motorway and stuff like that. And I'm not like much of a drinker. I was just sitting there like, this is the worst night of my life. Like, honestly, all for a football game. As soon as the game finished, back in the minibus and back up. But people listening will be like, that sounds great. What you're on about? That's like part and parcel of following your team. So yeah, that separation between like going as a fan and going to work, very interesting.
And it's the sacrifices as well. Like obviously we've said that then you're not getting to experience maybe a European adventure with your friends and that. So in the last 4 years, have you found that tricky?
Yeah, totally. I think that'd be my first season on Superscoreboard coincided with Motherwell somehow making it to 2 cup finals. I mean, see, like the rest of my existence is I've barely seen them in a cup final, and they made it to 2. So the first one came around to League Cup final. Well, they're both against Celtic. League Cup final. I was in the studio, and I had been in the studio for the semi-final, and I was just like, it was brutal because like you just couldn't experience it. It was kind of funny because like I got to stand and stare at Derek Johnson for 4 hours when Motherwell knocked Rangers out at the semi-final.
That's a bonus.
Exactly, like every cloud. And then it got to the final, and I was just like inevitable that I was going to be in the studio, and yeah, Motherwell lost anyway. Then when the Scottish Cup final came round, I sort of pushed and was like, oh, we should totally do the show live from Hampden. And then they're like, how's that going to work? Because we don't have live rights. You're not going to do the commentary, and I can't even remember why anyone thought it was a good idea, but we did it live from Hampden, which meant I sort of hosted the show up until kick-off. Someone else did some stuff during the game, and I came on after it. But we lost that one as well, so yeah, maybe I was a bad luck omen.
What's the how tricky is it say the semi-final to maybe suppress your emotions? It's well known, obviously, that you are a Motherwell fan, but you do still have to remain a little bit professional.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt it makes it easier being a Motherwell fan, I think, obviously, in this city rather than Celtic or Rangers. Not that people believe you, so that's another side of things. But I think it's good because I think you can kind of swing between those two extremes, like you mentioned. Like I'm never going to, take it too far. For instance, there was a lot that day of I don't know if people remember. So the semi-final, Motherwell won against Rangers. It was quite a controversial afternoon. I think there was like someone, one of the Rangers players got elbowed, like burst face and stuff like that. So that side of things on the phone and afterwards, that just has to be dealt with like professionally. That can't be. The fan can't really take over at that time. You get a little kind of feeling in your stomach, just like I don't think that ever really leaves you. Just that like either joy or disappointment, depending on how the result's gone. But it's just like anyone. It is just work at the end of the day. Maybe it's slightly different because there's a little bit of emotion attached. But I'd be pretty embarrassed to sort of not do it that way. The only time I've probably let it go a bit too much would be certain Scotland games. I think when Lee Griffiths scored the 2 free kicks, I wasn't like on air, but I was in the press box and jumping about like an absolute idiot. Like genuinely looking back, I feel a little bit embarrassed. But again, I think maybe get away with it.
Can't really, yeah.
Nah, it's Scotland, and you didn't have to be impartial. So yeah, you get used to it quickly. It's just work at the end of the day.
And it is just work at the end of the day. So you then eventually do get into the hot seat. You're the main man. How does that all come around?
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like a natural progression, I guess, but it just came around a lot quicker than I thought. And I mean, Jerry McCulloch, who is now at Celtic, of course, was the previous host. I had maybe stood in for him once or twice due to like sort of illness or whatever, being away doing things. We had like a 1 hour version of the show in the summer, which turned out to be a really good sort of training ground. That when he decided not to, that he would go elsewhere, they just asked me to do it basically. So, but I didn't expect that. I didn't know that he would be going, and I certainly didn't think they would ask me. I thought they would probably go for so-called a bigger name or something like that, someone who had been out there doing that sort of thing with a bit more experience to do it. So it was just a phone call out of the blue, really, from the boss at the time, who's sadly no longer with us, and he just said, "Yeah, look, I'll tell a lie. Actually, it was a mate of mine who had the boss's ear, and was like, look, this phone call's probably going to come. Like, prepare yourself for it." And remember, my wife was sitting in the. Well, she wasn't. Was she my wife at the time? I should know that. I think she was. We're in the car on loudspeaker, and she's like totally excited because naturally she's like that removed away from it, and she's like, why would you be anything but excited about that? But I was just like totally mixed between like, yes, excited, but just like, oh, like that's like, can I do that justice? Like, what if I'm rubbish at it? Like and some people might say I am. All the usual sort of things that maybe people don't see. People assume that you're always totally backing yourself and always think you're like super confident, but you know what it's like. It's not always that simple. So it was a mixed response at the time, but I'm glad that I got over that quite quickly.
Because it may just seem like a short stint, a couple hours a night and the big show at the weekend, but it's a lot more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, in some ways, yes. I mean, I would never like lay it on thick because I always say some people actually have to work for a living, like that. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm like totally it's comparable in that sense. Obviously, with that, there is in terms of like the preparation or the fact that you never really switch off. Like social media is good and bad for that. Like it's the first thing I think about when I wake up. It's the last thing I'll think about before I go to sleep. So that process never really ends. I'm like informally planning the show all day in my head. Can't ever really be too far away from like my phone or whatever. And then again, to completely underline, some people do work for a living. I'm not trying to act all stressed, but it can be quite intense. It's every night, and it's it's every Saturday, and sometimes it's Sunday as well. So quite often it's always 6 days. It's sometimes 7, and it's a very intense 2 hours. Obviously, we're like, can't really afford to take your eye off the ball. It might be a particularly controversial night, which comes with a lot of maybe some criticism as well as to the job that you're doing or not doing in some people's minds. So it's a weird one, yeah, where it is 2 hours. It feels like a lot more, but it's still not really work, is it? Let's be honest.
The last year, especially, has definitely offered, enough, and you'd never be short for a conversation. But going out every night, is there ever a worry that you think, what are we going to talk about tonight? It's maybe been a slow news day.
Yeah. Not for a long time, I must admit. It really has been good that way. I don't mind that challenge because it allows scope to maybe just be a little bit more creative, or maybe a bit more featurey, or things that we've not got time to discuss on a busy week, whether it be like youth development or, I remember one of the first years I did the show, we had a winter break and it was really quiet. We did like a grassroots week and it was great. We had we focused on like schools football and academies and amateur football and disability football and so on. But yeah, it's very rare now because Scottish football just like never rests. It never sleeps. There's like one day after another. There's always something, and particularly when Celtic and or Rangers are in Europe, that's because, as I'm sure you can imagine, that the likely candidate for a quiet night is like Tuesday, Wednesday night, but only if there's not European football. So Monday night, we're still digesting the weekend. If it's been a controversial weekend, we're definitely still on it by Tuesday. And all of a sudden, you're then previewing Wednesday night or Thursday night, depending on what the competition is, and you're back into the weekend. So, or certainly for the first half of the year, and then as we find, January comes and the teams tend to sort of drop out of Europe thereafter. But you're right. I mean, the last year's been insane. COVID first, Celtic's spectacular dip in form, lack of form thereafter, Rangers finding ways to win again, particularly crazy. But then before that, it's true what you said, that there was always something. I always remember, take even like things you'll forget about in Scottish football. Like, remember Rangers were trying to get Derek McInnes as their manager, like,
yeah,
completely forgotten about. That took up like a solid 2 weeks, like constant, like, and at the start of every season, I always have that little moment of doubt where I'm like, oh, what if it's not as busy this year? Like, what if we're really struggling to think about topics? And it just never happens yet, touch wood.
The piece de resistance, of course, is the callers come in, and talk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they will always be the stars of the show. It's a phone-in format, so they will always, and I'll never lose sight of that. The show can't really exist without them. I'm certainly not on its current format, and we could maybe modify it slightly. But it's the weird thing is, I think it probably just works the way like any other phone-in on any other radio station anywhere in the world works, albeit it's maybe just a little bit more intense. Like, people, I always like the sort of misconceptions or like the accusations of whatever it may be, perceived bias, because people say like you choose which callers come on, and it's like, well, obviously, like, I don't think there's a phone in anywhere in the world where you just phone straight through and we just pick up the phone and then you just like wait and see what happens. For a start, there's like 20 people phoning at once, so how would we do that? So yeah, people just call in, and there's always going to be that sort of hardcore regular group of callers that phone often. But I think it actually dawned on me the other night that we sort of going all nostalgic, but I had this moment the other night when I think we had like a couple of new callers on in a row, like literally 2 days ago, and it just came out on air, and I was like, even after all this time, you still get new callers. People maybe don't realise that, and I appreciate there are some recognisable names and some recognisable voices that come on, and so people assume that they're on constantly, but they're probably not on as much as people would think. And ultimately, we're on. We do 200 and about, what's that be, about 260 shows a season every year in Glasgow in the West. We're not going to get brand new.
A new one every day, yeah.
Possible, like, do crunch the numbers. But honestly, maybe, I don't know if you, what the next question is, if there's like some examples and stuff, but it's never a dull day. It's just, honestly, it's just brilliant.
That'll definitely be a question. But before we get to that, were you a little bit surprised maybe, you know, when you came into it, you were the younger figure, and not that that's, you know, because you come in because of the job you can do, but were you maybe a little bit sceptical as to how much the phoning could still survive, you know, because you're so conscious of social media now, and that, to be honest, folk just tend to phone each other the same now.
Yeah, I probably didn't. It was probably more about the fear of like not doing a good job rather than the format. It's just always been hugely popular, and I don't take that for granted. I don't think you can rely on that, and I think the show has subtly evolved though, and that's the thing that. And by the way, this is not everyone will think it's for the better. I completely accept that, but it has subtly evolved. Like, although the phone-in element is still at its core, if you look at the way that the show engages with social media now, because it has to, and that process, that transition probably started a little bit before I took over, and then maybe I do that even more. If you look at that, yeah, that would be the biggest one. Probably the way the show interacts with social media, just some of the talking points that are maybe would never have been brought up in the past, but we maybe try and be a little bit more lighthearted now. We appreciate that, you know, people can get different things in different places, so we kind of have to be this like catch-all location where you can get a little bit of breaking news, a little bit of heated debate, and maybe a little bit of detail of like in-depth stuff, but a little bit of humour, a little bit lighthearted, happy, like, and try and be this like real mixed bag, because I know like it's not lost on me. I know that if people want a sort of tactical deep dive, like they won't come here. But at the same time, we can't provide that, because that's not what we could, but that's not what everyone wants either.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what's been great. People often ask me as well of, you know, like, like, are you worried about the kind of, whether it be podcasts or fan media or whatever? And it's like, far from it. I just think actually there's room for everyone, and people will then know that if they want one thing, they can come to us, and if they want something a bit more in depth, specifically about their team, they can go elsewhere and get the podcast or whatever it may be. So I actually think there's room for everybody, and it's been good. If anything, some of the listening figures and stuff over the last year would certainly suggest that Super Scoreboard is, and that the format is not it's not ready to die off anytime soon.
Not at all, because as you say, we do get some fantastic calls in. So you've got to give us a few of your best examples.
Honestly, there've been loads. It's just a roller coaster. So like the kind of, I mean, my first sweary of the season was last night, which was just a guy that just and forgive me, I don't know what your policy on swearing is. I don't know if you want me to like. Last night was just a simple fuck, you know, just like fucking Glenn Kamara or something. Like you know that Scottish way that we do, where we just punctuate sentences with it. It's like no big deal, but it has to go. It has to get cut off. Obviously, that was the first one of the season last night. And then there've been ones that use that like spectacularly well. The example I always give was the time. I've only had one C bomb dropped on the show, and it's obviously like the worst word, and in that respect. And it was a guy who, again, he just used it in that like typically Scottish way. Like it wasn't even,
and in the
it was like good. It was almost in a good way, if you can call it that. He was a Rangers fan, and he called in and he was saying, you know, we're lacking a bit of bite in midfield, you know, and he's saying, it pains me to say it. He's like, we need somebody like Scott Brown. Now, I'm not saying I like them, but we need someone like Scott Brown. Well, my heart just like sinks, my stomach sinks, everything sinks. I'm like sweaty palms. I'm like searching for the button that cuts it off. But then it cuts it off. But we're then live. We're always live, but we're in an 8-second delay to like avoid to avoid that. So I've got 8 seconds basically to identify that there's a problem and cut it off. But then that 8 seconds, sorry to bore you to tears, instantly gets wiped out, and you're like straight away back in the sort of present moment. So the pundits have heard it. They'll burst out laughing almost, but then you can't. So you want to laugh, but you have to keep going and pretend that nothing's happened. So yeah, that would be the kind of obvious one. Remember, like, a guy outside Ibrox, like, just so raging, just like so passionate that he had like chucked his burger away or something like that. He's like, he's like screaming, I've just chucked my cheeseburger away. and you just see people at their best and their worst. Like, they totally open up, which I find amazing. Whether it be happy, sad, angry. The swearers are always the ones that you do kind of remember. I remember a girl came on, and she was like, we had come off the back of talking more rubbish than usual, right? So like we were kind of laughing. We went into the call kind of laughing, and I sort of faded up and say it was Amy. I was like, right, Amy, what's your point? And in like a total like chewing the fat style, she was just like, your patter's pure shite. And I could not stop laughing, but I had to. Like you mentioned earlier about trying to act professional, the tears were properly dripping down my face. Gordon Dale, Mark Wilson were like on the floor. We crouched down behind the desks. We actually stand, which people maybe don't realise. We stand at a kind of higher desk, and they were like crouched down, and it's just absolutely gone. So those are the funny ones. But do you know what? For every one of them, there's somebody who phones up and says, I've not left the house in 40 years, and you guys really get me through every night of the week. Or I've been in a terrible place mentally for the last year, and I just want to thank you for whatever. Or I've a gambling problem. I remember one guy phoned up with gambling and said, I remember the moment I phoned my mum and told her I had lost everything and I was in tears, and that's the moment my life changed forever. Then you're just like, it's just amazing that people are brave enough to come on and share their story. And I'm like humbled and honoured that they would like think that's like that we can receive that sort of call as well. So for every mad one, there's always a sort of more serious one that sticks in my mind.
That is incredible, and it's the impact as well, because it's not just yourself, and it is a team. And what's your relationship like? Especially you mentioned Mark Wilson there with the pundits, because it's been an incredible asset, and the pundits have always been there, but in later years, there's not been that reliance as well to have to be with a journalist. They can both succeed together.
Yeah, so that's again, that's something that's probably subtly evolved. Sorry, where the lineup is undeniably different, but there'll always be one or two that have stayed the same. And again, going back to what I said about trying to, like, content-wise, you're just trying to piece like a jigsaw together, whilst acknowledging that you're never going to get 10 pundits in a week. Every single person out there's like, oh, good, oh yeah, I love all of them. Let's be honest, who loves any of their pundits? Like, really, it's always a sort of love-hate, and you'll have a couple of favourites and a couple of not. So again, it's about trying. It's just a big jigsaw. It's about like Hugh, who's like the cornerstone of the show, and like seen it all, and has got like ridiculous stories. Like, used to exchange Christmas cards with Sir Alex Ferguson, and now he hangs about with me 3 times a week. Like, what a fall from grace. And then on the journalist side of things, like Roger Hanna, who's like a pure anorak and just knows everything about everything, to your class clowns, DL and Wilson on a Thursday, who, and Mark having played semi recently as well, and kind of played with Neil Lennon or under Neil Lennon or with James Forrest as he was coming through. So you get that sort of insight. And on the other side, like Alex Ray, who just like lives and breathes his football, like just loves football, like dead enthusiastic about it. And then that evolution always has to keep coming. So in the last couple of years, Andy Halliday's come on. Last season he started and is doing a bit more now. So to have a current player there is good, and that brings its own challenges, because again, that has to be complemented with someone else, because you know that you kind of come on and like slaughter refs or slaughter people he's playing against or whatever. But you're right. I think traditionally it would be like, oh right, let's have one journalist, one ex-player, and let's just always go with that. And at times that's maybe still the preferred format, but I think the DL and Wilson Thursday experiment just sort of took off, and maybe realised that it doesn't have to be that way. What you maybe find though is you're a slave to like the breaking news. So if there's something really serious that day, it might be a good idea to like get Hugh or Roger or someone else just to come in and like supplement it as well, because you don't want to put Mark and Gordon in a position of dealing with stuff in a way that they wouldn't normally. And I mean, last night, for instance, bore you with the backstage drama, but like, so we had for a few weeks there been getting in a bit of a run of like Gary Caldwell and Andy Halliday doing a Wednesday night, and then Gary gets the Newcastle under-23s job on Monday, and it's like, right, right, but like let's find someone else quickly. These are the things that maybe you obviously don't see. And Tony Watt came in. So again, that was 2 current players last night. Risky sometimes, yes, but it was fine.
You mentioned him a few times, but talk us through the mainstay that is Hugh Keevins.
Guy's honestly, he's an enigma. Like I just don't understand. Like I don't understand him. Like he's just one of a kind. Like truly. Like forget. Like I know you mean like on the show, but like let's think about this for a minute, right? So he doesn't drive. Who doesn't drive? Seriously. Like at his age, how has he got through the full career he does? Doesn't he drive? Doesn't he like chocolate? Now I don't know anybody else. I don't know a single other person really that doesn't like chocolate. Some people might take it or leave it, but he genuinely can't take it. We found out the other day he doesn't swim. Can't swim either. He's just got all these like weird wee quirks, and again something that, because it's maybe subtly happened over time, he has totally evolved. Yes, he's still kind of grumpy and he's still kind of cynical, but he's now like obviously on Twitter, and like he's like your mad grandpa on Twitter. He's like, and because he's got the Nokia, which is like another part of the show, like he can't tweet on the go. Like it's only if he fires up his laptop at certain times in the week. So if he tweets, I know that he's got the laptop open. It's late at night, and judging by the tone of it, I can sometimes tell if he's had a glass of red as well. And so he's totally evolved, and he's now he's up for. He knows that. I think he would tell you that like we probably keep him young, sort of thing, and then him and I have this like. I'm sure he thinks I'm quite cheeky, and I'll like always try and argue with him, but that's what he's there for, and that's what he likes. And then to the wealth of experience, some of the things he's seen, his stories are amazing, and his turn of phrase, like every now and then, even after all these shows, he'll just say something, and I'm like, man, the way he wrapped those words up was just like nothing I could ever achieve. So he's one of a kind. I think that just about covers it. Love him or hate him, he's one of a kind.
Is that relationship like maybe one of your favourite moments on air?
Yeah, I think I remember as well the first game the first game where I felt, oh right, this is a step up was because I had been out doing games on my own on a Saturday. It was always like a kind of championship game that I would do. I was young and kind of learning, and it wasn't even every week, and then it became every week, and then it became, oh actually it's Motherwell against Inverness this week. But the first one that I did like with another pundit, and that's when you kind of know it was like a big game. It was I think it was Christmas Eve or thereabouts, maybe like 23rd. Rangers played St Mirren away in Paisley, and it was Hugh and I, and that was just like that was the real like. I wouldn't say like I'd arrived. That sounds far too dramatic. It was just more like, right, this is serious. This is the main game. Everyone's going to listen to that, and it was alongside him. Because obviously we couldn't be more different. I mean, if you look at, he always says his great line is he's now on the show for the first time with a presenter that wasn't born when he started working, something like that, or when he started on the show. So we're so different. But I think that's the way it has to be. It has to be that I press his buttons. It has to be that I try and pick him up when I don't agree. It has to be that we keep him on his toes, and I love that. I couldn't pick one. As a favourite as such, because guys like Andy and Mark are a lot closer to my age, so we're maybe in the same wavelength with certain things. Get Gordon's sense of humour a lot, and he lives near me, and we golf together, and we see each other in the gym, and so on. So it's just a real mixed bag, and it's good. It's a nice blend.
It has been, offered you so much, and it's opened different doors. You're talking about Sky earlier on as well, but you've also done a lot of close work with the national team. It's been a massive few years. How's that been covering?
Yeah, it's been good. These things have always just sort of grown. Without getting too deep, I'm like everybody else, where like I'm ambitious and I like my career and I want it to go in a certain direction, but I've never really been the type to go and sort of chap doors and like kind of like chase opportunities. Maybe I should a bit more. Like I don't know. Some people are like aggressively ambitious. I'm probably moderately ambitious, if that's a phrase. So when these things kind of fall on your lap, I'm always like, I'm like quite pleasantly surprised. So that the national team, the podcast side of things, we used to do a few. I remember like doing one with Andy Robertson on the day that he got named Scotland captain. I think that would be successive. Kind of the last few managers we've done one like round about the time they've been appointed, and then seeing on the women's national team we've done stuff with Shelley Kerr and some of the legends like like James McFadden, who's like my absolute footballing idol. Like had to like properly like not fanboy him when I did that one at the start. So yeah, it's been good. Cam, I'm like genuinely a passionate big Scotland fan, and as we said earlier, you don't really have to be as you don't have to be impartial at all. So it's good to kind of throw yourself into that. You get to see the guys in their own environment. I remember doing podcasts in and around the hotel with like John McGinn and Ryan Fraser, and seeing how they operate. And then that's sort of, I've not really done so much of them recently, but that's kind of graduated into like hosting the Scottish Cup draws and stuff like that, which I've really enjoyed, because that's like it's almost like a cornerstone of like the football calendar, isn't it? It's just like the cup draw. So I started off doing a few of like the earlier rounds last year, and I assumed that it would be just the very early rounds, but maybe I got a bit lucky because of, I think probably because of COVID, the TV companies didn't really pick up on them the same way that they did. I think it took until like the semis last year, I think, for the TV companies to, so I actually did them right up until that stage. And honestly, I shouldn't admit this, I genuinely forgot what stage of the cup we were at, and they were like, "Will you do the cup draw?" And I was just like, "Yeah, like sure, like no problem, whatever." Look at me, this is what I do. I don't know these things. And I remember like getting the sheet, and I was like, "Fuck!" Like Celtic, Rangers, like Aberdeen, they're all in this stage of the draw. Like people are actually going to be watching this one. I need to like do a bit of a better job. I did one with Peter Lovencrantz, who was the guest, and Celtic and Rangers came out in the rehearsal. And he was like so stunned. He was like, this is unbelievable. But it was just a rehearsal, and we went, and they didn't come out. They almost came out, though, which is so weird. Like, because you'll have heard it all before. Oh, hot and cold balls, blah blah. But like, you would be amazed at how like strict it is. It's like I'm pretty sure I can tell all this. It's like they come over before, and it's mostly for the guests. Luckily, I just stand and kind of read it out, but when they pull the balls out, they're like, now do not look in the bowl, make sure you don't look in, and if you drop a ball accidentally and it goes back in, we need to start the full thing again, because we couldn't be seen that it was like you were deliberately putting it back in or whatever. So it's actually really quite strict. So it came out in the rehearsal, and then it went something like Celtic v blah, then Rangers was the next one when the real draw came around, and then in the very next round they did come out together. It was your was it the sea shanty guy, the postman, Nathan Evans?
Nathan Evans.
He was doing the draw, and it did. You'll remember, obviously, the sides did get drawn out together, and it was amazing, because the room just felt different. There was like a realization where you're still live and you can't go, oh, what are the chances? Look, like you don't want to make too much a deal of it. But I could hear up the back of the room, particularly a few people a bit like, I don't know why, like, but so yeah, that's been good fun.
We made strict after Rod Stewart was allowed to do it. That's why.
Exactly, I know.
Let me get him back on for you.
Absolutely, I think he's probably banned forever, as good as it was.
Oh, that was a good moment. So what's the ambitions going forward now? Like you say, the Sky rolls coming and going on in the mornings as well. You're getting to go to Dingwall. Is that where you go next? Is TV the destination?
I think it's like I said earlier. I'm not so focused on like trying to do that. It's more about just trying to probably multi-skill a little bit. Yeah, and so in that sense, it would be nice to just learn a little bit of how TV operates, rather than thinking like, oh, I'm done with Superscoreboard and then TV's like next or like up on the ladder, because I'll never take for granted like how privileged I am to do what I do at the moment. It's like such a cliche, but like genuinely that specifically was my dream, is my dream job, and always was. So, but I think like everybody, the opportunity just to multi-skill, learn something new, get taken out of your comfort zone a little bit. You're never truly out your comfort zone in Superscoreboard because you never know what's around the corner. But naturally, after like over 1,000 shows, it certainly feels a lot more comfortable than it used to. So nice to push those boundaries. A couple of weeks ago, when I did the first game in Vision on Sky, it was the Aberdeen Dundee United, the first weekend of the season, and it took me back 4 years to like my first show, where in my ear, they're like, right, okay, coming to 10, 9, 8, and like the butterflies start going, the palms like a little bit sweaty, and you're conscious that actually people can see you for a start, so you need to actually keep a straight face and so on. And then as soon as I started, it just felt good again, and I remember why I do it. Like, I'm spouting out all sorts of cliched stuff here, but like that buzz you get off like broadcasting live is just that's why we do it. So yep, that was a long way of saying that. Yeah, probably a little bit of TV, and I'm excited to see where else we can take Super Scoreboard as well, because I am confident that whilst it seems like it stays in a kind of rigid format, it has evolved a lot over the last 4 years. So it'll be nice to see where it goes next.
Well, remember your woolly jacket for Dingwall at the weekend. It's freezing up there. I was there too long ago. But Gordon, thank you so much for joining me on Soccer Supernova.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.